I'm going to skip that. Maybe we'll get back to it later. I'm going to come out of the gates hot on this one. And so, because there's a couple people on LinkedIn earlier this week that were chirping because they've had too many shots of the ABM Kool-Aid. And so we're going to do a little segment here to set some people straight. And so the segment here is going to start with marketing sourced revenue is the game. Influenced revenue, you can track it if you want. You can do whatever you want. Marketing sourced revenue is the game, and I'm going to explain why. The first thing to think about is that marketing influences all revenue. It influences all revenue. So what is the influenced revenue actually doing? It's playing a game of attribution on revenue that was going to close. Because if you look at it broadly, like I don't need an attribution tool to know that a buyer is going to use our website, to consume the content, to understand the brand, to potentially look at a case study, to get different advertisements at some point. Like that's marketing. That influences every single deal that you close. And so what influence revenue is doing is just trying to attach certain marketing activities to that revenue, as opposed to just understanding that it influences it all and there's no need to track it. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into this because when you think about like running your marketing team, when we think it's similar to the thought on attribution that I have, but on influence is the same. Like talk to me about one company that gets scored, has their marketing team scored on influenced revenue, that does a podcast, that does anything that they can't, that does organic social well, that does anything that they can't measure. They're not going to do any of those activities because they can't measure them. And it's not going to deem any level of influence. So they only do the things like the things that got mentioned. We want to get more people to our stakeholders for our live events, so our sales team can sell to them. We're going to put people through email nurtures. We're going to do all of the, textbook things that companies do because they can measure them very, very closely. Now, another thing to think about is that if you're being asked to measure your influenced revenue, it might lead you to question whether or not you're doing effective marketing, because you wouldn't get that question if you were putting 50% of net new revenue in the door. Nobody cares. No executive cares how much revenue you influenced when you're sourcing that amount of revenue for the company. And when you're going to go and try and take your budget from 1 million to 4 million, you're going to have a much easier conversation with the CEO when you say, we did $9 million of net new or of added ARR last year. 5 million of that was expansion. Out of the 4 million that was net new, marketing sourced 2.6 of it. The year before that, marketing sourced 300K. So we were able to grow that delta of our revenue growth was driven purely on marketing source revenue over the last 12 months to the tune of $1.3 million that we're going to then future expansion, given that 50% of our added ARR is expansion revenue in the future. I want to go and I want to try and make that 2.6 move to 7 million next year. And what I'm going to need is X, Y, and Z. And that conversation works a lot better when you're going to scale a marketing engine, as opposed to, well, we closed 4 million and out of the 4 million, like 2.6 of it we influenced, and then have that conversation with an entire executive team. And you'll get the pushback that every single marketer gets was like, well, we sourced that deal. We were going to close that one anyway. I get that you added the CIO to the event, but the deal was in stage 5 before the event even happened. Like you're going to get those types of things. It's very clear on sourced revenue growth, what is driving the impact. And so I want people to think about that. I don't measure influenced revenue. I don't find the need to, because we drive enough sourced revenue that those questions shouldn't come up. And I think that's something to think.
Or yeah, I was going to say
one more point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just one more point. The people that are using influenced revenue are the ones that need to attach these types of metrics, because they're running the ABM playbook. They're drinking the ABM Kool-Aid. They're running display ads. They're running landing page engagement to outbound cold calls. They are doing those types of things, and they need to use influence because the stuff isn't actually working. And so that's why the MarTech, the ABM vendors tell you to measure it that way, is because it's the easiest way to attach marketing activities to revenue when the revenue most likely would have closed anyway. I can see right through that pitch from Terminus, to be direct. And so like, it's 2021. Marketing needs to drive a business, not be a sales team's assistant like it's 2008. Yes, like doing pipeline marketing, getting executives in your ICP to your events, producing content that people love, that stuff is table stakes. That can't be your primary, that can't be the only part of the strategy. And so just want people to like, I feel very strongly about this one, that source revenue is the game for marketers moving forward.
I was going to say, you've touched on this before, but I think it's a good time for a recap of like best practices to actually measure marketing sourced revenue. So for the people that are bought in, what's the best way to do it? How should they be thinking about that?
Yeah. So the easiest way for me to measure, and I like to keep things simple. I just find that it's easy. So you don't need attribution software. You don't need some complex like rules. What I'm looking at is how many people came to our website and said, I want to talk to a sales rep, and then became a customer. And over time, is that number growing? And how much is it growing by? And how much is it costing us to get those people into the funnel to close one at a cost baseline efficiency? And so the growth, if you have a baseline number, the growth is what matters, the growth over time. When we go into a company and they're creating 300K ARR in net new pipeline, qualified pipeline every month, and then 12 months later, we look at it in March and it's 2.3 million, and that's been growing over time throughout that time, it's very clear what's driving that number. And when you drive that number up by the tune of $7 to $10 million in qualified pipeline in a year with no additional expenses, just by doing marketing well, that is where you go and you say, okay, now I want to go and have additional expenses because our cost per SKU is this. We just closed 11 50K deals last month. Like, let's make this thing work faster. The funnel's built. And I think that's where, I mean, I didn't go very deeply into how to measure it, but it's very simple. If you adjust your marketing strategy to, I want to market to people so that they come to us to buy, then you change your marketing execution. The measurement becomes very simple. You're actually not incentivized to do a lot of the mid funnel or other things like that, like gated content or things like that get stripped away because you're not incentivized to the metrics to do it. So you can adjust your marketing strategy to driving the outcomes that you want. And so would be happy to answer a follow-up because I'm not sure I got exactly what you wanted to get out of me.
Wow. No, I think that was helpful. And actually another question that popped up that actually I think would be a nice segue into the third agenda point of email nurtures was, how do you think about incentivizing marketing to do the things to help move deals through the pipeline versus creating new deals? And like, do you view that as useful? So that could be a nice question to answer, and then kind of segue into some of your thoughts on
another key point about measuring it is how many people come to us to buy, and the growth of that is that it gets rid of channel attribution. It's focused solely on what matters to the business, and the marketers need to decide how those things are happening, and smart marketers should be able to figure that out, which gives you flexibility to do a podcast, to run paid social in a different way, to produce a YouTube video show that there's no tracking on who's watching it, to run influencer programs that are non-transactional. There's so many things that get opened up that actually work when you start to change your measurement to that way. When it comes to like, how do you distinguish between marketing to people that are in pipeline versus not in pipeline? I mentioned this today on a different conversation that I was having. If you're doing marketing effectively, then it doesn't matter. Like it won't matter who's in pipeline and who's not. Like, and I want to really break this down. Like, I know that we have deals in our pipeline where the CMO watches my LinkedIn video and they have a proposal. I know that there have been people on this Zoom that were inside of a sales process when we were presenting it and they were still here. And so like, if you're producing content that people want, there's no distinction about whether or not they're in the funnel. It's really interesting to think. Like, I think that the buyer's journey creates a lot of like the mock buyer's journey about how people do it creates a lot of weird kind of self-serving content behavior because they think that they need to like convince someone to move from stage 4 to stage 5, or they need to get one more stakeholder to that event, or those different things, which end up being a lot of transactional sales things. And so the easiest way to look at whether or not your content is really effective is to look at the span of people that consume it. If you have your evangelist customers and people that are nowhere near buying and everything in between all consuming the content, then you have a good content strategy. And so I think if you really think about doing marketing well, there's not a lot of distinction between the person that's in stage 3 versus the person that doesn't have an active opportunity. Do we pull all of the accounts out of Salesforce and do marketing at the account level to deals that are active? Sure, we do that. Do we need to do it? Are those accounts going to be getting the marketing anyway? Absolutely. And so I think that some people over-engineer those particular parts of the process when if you just fix the whole system, it would resolve itself.
Do you think there's a place though for probably like higher priced products to do, whether it's existing customer expansion or very late stage, like large prospects for high value products? Like I have seen some of that work well, where you have some targeted marketing in collaboration with sales. So I think there are some scenarios where those things can work.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. My personal feeling on that is that I just consider that more sales than marketing. Like I get that your marketing team is responsible for putting on the event, but it's a sales event, not a marketing event. And that's just a distinction I make in my head that other people don't. And so like, I just like, yes, I can see how those would be effective. Like I've been at dinners with sales teams when we're going to close $1 million deal and it closes on a Friday after we did the dinner on a Thursday night. And I get that, but that was not a marketing event. So that's just the way that I split it in my head.
Well, and then like we've talked about customer marketing before too. And I think when they are customers and you think about expansion, I do think marketing does play a role, but that's obviously very collaborative with customer success or other departments that are obviously managing that relationship at that point.
Totally. Yeah. And for the sake of just like clarifying it for people, like I'm pretty much focused on driving new business, right? Like there are teams and there are tactics about people that are going to, move people late in enterprise deals or go and expand other customers. Like that's just not the place where we focus here. Do we get kind of like additional effects by doing great marketing that hit customers and they learn about new products, or they see a case study and a use case that they didn't do? Do those things happen? Yes. But like, that is not the core objective of what we're here to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think also though, like you said, which I totally agree with, you can leverage and repurpose a ton of the things that you do for net new acquisition for your current customers. And especially when you think about your content, like I think it's a good thing to remember that it serves a different purpose, but making sure that you're leveraging your best assets like across the customer journey. Not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea.
You want to tackle the next agenda item, or should I bring on Bob for a question?
I'll jump through this email one because we kind of segued and then we'll kind of see where we end up.
Cool.
So moving to the next one on the agenda, mainly for the listeners, is the role of email nurtures in B2B marketing. I think this is a really interesting topic. I think it's a really interesting topic because I haven't run an email nurture since 2016 after I just figured out a better way to do it. So the first thing to think about is the difference between a nurture and the distribution channel of email, right? And so I think what a lot of people don't really seem to understand is that you can nurture people using other distribution channels than email, like LinkedIn, like a podcast, like an event series, like YouTube videos, like commenting on their LinkedIn post every day. There's plenty of ways to nurture people other than sending them automated emails. And so that's the first thing to think about, is like, if the goal is to nurture someone, is email really the best vehicle for you to do it? I would argue that in today's day and age, it might not be. So that's step one. But then when we think about the overall like flow of an email nurture, again, if you consider the idea that the buyer's journey is not linear, that these are incredibly complex, especially in complex deals, that they're incredibly complex processes, that people are moving in and out of different types of buying stages that you'll never be able to assess with your technology. So that's one thing to consider. And then the idea that because it's automated, it creates a system where you don't need to update content. And so what I transitioned to in 2016 was, how do I create good enough content that I don't need to automate anything, and I send emails on my own manually to a set of people? And so instead of having a nurture, and I interact with plenty of companies that their email nurture sequence has not changed in 3 years, and move that to, how do we produce good content that we feel good about sending someone every week, and move out of the nurture, because it forces you to create content at a volume that is more than acceptable today. I would say borderline necessary today. And then how do you distribute that to people? And how do you create good enough content that it spans across a lot of different people that might be in different stages of their own journey, are things that I think about a lot. And so I moved to I ran email nurtures for years. And I measured what was happening when I would have people download the ebook, run through five steps of an email nurture, and what came out within the next 12 months in terms of opportunities and revenue, whether that was marketing source, sales source, it didn't matter. Did those accounts become customers as they went through there? And we only had 5,000 accounts, and I was putting a lot of people through there. One deal for 26K ARR in 12 months of all of that effort. And then I started creating good content and distributing it every week to a static list that wasn't necessarily growing. It was growing based on people that sales was interacting with, that was getting brought into HubSpot. And I was sending emails in bulk to that list. And I was watching people click on the email about the video that I filmed with the emergency medicine director at this company or at this hospital, click on the email, watch 7 minutes of the video, and then ask for a demo, and watch 10 people do that. And so when you have an email nurture, you're letting people move through one by one, as opposed to running it in bulk. I believe that you get more scale. The results were significantly better. Like, it wasn't even close. And so I would challenge people to consider looking at that. Does it require you to create more content? Yes. Does it require the content to actually be good in order to be effective? Yes. But it's an interesting way to look at it. And then I guess, like, people know my position on this, but email, whether it's at my own company or with the B2B companies that we work with, it's priority number 5. And so I think just understanding the scalability. I'll give you another one that's really interesting that people don't consider when you think about the distribution channel between email. If I was running a nurture in a podcast or on LinkedIn, is the shareability and reach of people that you don't have their email address. I would love to try and quantify how many people have seen my videos that because of reach, network effect, shareability inside of LinkedIn, that would have never seen it if I sent it in an email. It's got to be millions of people. It could be close to 10 million people. And so when you think about whether between email and those things, like, nobody's forwarding your nurture email to somebody else. It's just the truth. And so the first step is you got to be able to create good content, and then you got to map the content to the appropriate distribution channels. And if you look deeply, email is not the first one.
I think email can work in very certain scenarios, but it has to be executed really, really well. There's some good debate in the chat on this too.
It's great. Like, if you sell a $500 a year product, you're going to have to lean on email more, right? Like, there's places to that I get it, that makes sense. If you're product led and you're shoving a bunch of people in a free trial and you need to get your conversion rate from 6 to 8% to PQL, you're going to have to send more emails. I get it. And so there are instances, e-commerce, like another one, there's plenty of opportunities. It's typically in low cost products with high volumes of email sending where that matters. But if you start moving up into the like complex deals, there's just better ways to get it done. Like, do you want someone to sit in your email nurture for 3 years? Or do you want to go and market somewhere else where they pay attention, where they actually consume the information? And so, yeah, there's nothing to argue. I literally in my talk said we used email and it was really effective. It just wasn't nurture based. Like, it's not that email can't work. It's that as a marketer, I'm trying to push people. Like, people think that I'm like the person that talked about influence revenue, thought that I was like trying to rain on his parade. I'm trying to help people. Like, there's just a different way to look at it that's going to help you be more effective as a marketer if you can change your mindset around it.
Yeah. Or kind of like what we do. People were referencing the demand gen live email and that they check it because they want to know what's being talked about. So leveraging email for other events or content that you're doing doesn't, yeah.
I'm so happy you guys like the emails. Angelica does them. She's doing a great job.
Except Matthew, he doesn't read them. Oh, I feel like you're on a roll tonight. You're on fire. You got to tackle this last agenda item, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Cool. So this one I've kind of been riffing on for a little while. I thought it would be interesting here because after I talk about it, I get a lot of great questions from all of you, which will help clarify the thoughts, I believe. And that's my hope. And so I've been in B2B marketing since 2012. So like that's sort of the change. And I've watched this change over almost 10 years. And a lot of people on this Zoom might have experienced it for even longer than that. But I've watched it over the past 10 years, and there's been a dramatic change from 2012 where like, you know, B2C companies were just thinking about whether or not they needed a Facebook page to where we are right now. There's been a lot that has changed. And during that period of time, the main thing that I believe that has changed is the access to information that buyers have and the amount and how they've been accustomed to purchasing products in more innovative like go-to-market segments than B2B SaaS, which would be like something like e-commerce and an Amazon model. So just like how people buy things has changed. That's bleeding into B2B clearly. I think everyone believes that. And the core thing that has changed is that in 2008, sales was responsible for a majority of the customer journey because there wasn't a lot of access of information on the internet. People needed help. There was definitely not product led at that time. Like those are the things that were happening. And so somebody needed a salesperson to talk them through and consult and help them figure out which product they needed. And so sales managed most of the journey. And so at that point, marketing's job was to do brand, aka build trade show booths, create a nice website. If they, you know, a lot of companies maybe didn't even have one in 2007, 2008, which is crazy. Create a website and like deliver, you know, leads to sales. And leads at that point was, I need to figure out how to get someone's phone number so that we can call them because our sales team doesn't have any other way to get it. I need someone to give me their phone number because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to access it. That was 2008. And here we are in 2021. And the core difference is that buyers want marketing to own more of the customer journey, and they want sales to be the last completion step. And to be honest, I think in a lot of cases, if sales wasn't there, buyers would be fine. Buyers would be fine executing that transaction on their own if they could. A lot of companies don't allow that for a variety of reasons. I'm not here talking about like, you know, sales and needing. I'm just talking about how the buyer feels. And so the old game, marketing or sales owns a majority of the customer journey. And the new game, buyers want something different and buyers want to interface with marketing for a majority of the time. And companies have not adjusted their marketing strategy or overall go-to-market to that core need of the buyer, the core desire of the buyer to do most of the thing on their own and then transact when they want to transact. And so when we look at those two differences from 2008, when marketing was, I need to get phone numbers and I need to get email addresses so that sales can cold call people and do sales because they need to manage 80% of the customer journey, to where we are right now. If you look at a lot of marketing teams, they're doing the same thing. There's more technology behind it. There's more tracking around it. There's a lot more software to do it. But essentially, it's the same thing. I want to get contact information so our sales team can do sales to people that don't want to buy right now. And so if you acknowledge that, and then you think about, okay, what would I change about my revenue strategy and how I allocate budget and the activities that I do and how I measure it to align to a buyer journey that exists today? And you'd most likely have a fundamentally different approach if you truly acknowledge that. I totally get that there's companies that have a lot of infrastructure that are not going to be able to turn back it's going to be challenging to kind of adjust those things. For newer companies, like, we can be a decent model here. Like, we started our company in 2019 and have basically gone against completely what anyone would recommend that we do. No sales team, no outbound, like pure content marketing over a variety of the most effective channels today, with content that drives people in to close mid-six-figure deals in 30 days. And we have there's SaaS companies out there that are closing deal sizes at that same range that take them 2 years because they're going to market in the wrong way that doesn't align with how people buy. And so I'll pause there.
You know what? It got me thinking as you were talking about that. I wonder what like the future game is going to look like, because the more I see this playing out, like I completely agree with your thesis that buyers will want to engage less and less with sales, and marketing's going to influence those buying decisions. I feel like the next step after that, and who knows the timing of it, is I think word of mouth and like referrals from trusted resources. I think we're going to get to a point where almost all decision making gets to that point. I feel like you start to see that more, and it's interesting how a lot of the organic plays will really fuel that for the long term. And I think the smart companies that are able to see, beyond the next 5 chess moves, but the next 10 after that, like that, I don't know, that's where my head went as you were talking.
That's called brand, right? Like, that's what it is. How many people know about you? How do they feel about you? Who are they going? Or how many people are evangelists that are going to tell other people? Are you connected with the people that influence a majority of buying decisions? Do you have relationships with those people? Do they trust you? Do they like you the most? And that is how I agree. That's how the game will play out, because product parity will continue to get larger and larger. The differences between products will become less and less significant. And because development cycles move more quickly, and brand will win, is the way that I look at it. Who knows how long that will take? I think it'll be really interesting to look back at this in 2027 and see if we are there yet. But like, that's where we're headed. It's happening right now. Like, I'd be really interested. I don't know how we would do this research, but I'd be really interested to understand, for every product that costs more than $50,000 a year in a B2B buying purchase, like, how many of those were driven through purely a referral? Like, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z revenue collective, someone that you trust. Like, I get that. I get those DMs probably 20 times a week, and I tell people the truth. And so, and we cover quite a bit of tech on this Zoom as well. And so it's really interesting to think about, because I imagine I don't know how much it is, but it's probably a significant amount already.
I have another prediction to throw in there. So word of mouth is driving the bulk of sort of buying decisions, net new customer acquisition. I think in that case, what you could also see is a consolidation of sales and customer success. Because really at that point, what you have is a buyer ready to buy, and you just need to like validate fit and enable onboarding. And it'll be interesting. Like, I actually think that's an interesting way to think about like the future of sales and success, because you actually need a bit of both of those skill sets if you're getting a buyer at that stage. You don't need pure sales, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting if those roles actually eventually morph together, and you have your person from the beginning, and they take you through that journey, because that's ultimately also what buyers want. They don't like being handed off from person to person to person.
Fascinating. Coming out here with a couple revenue predictions. Like it.
For that.
I like it. Let's open it up to some questions. It's great to have everyone here. Let's do this.
All right, Bob, I'm going to bring you on to kick us off.
Hello. How you doing tonight?
Hey, looks beautiful out there.
Yeah, it's a nice day today. Hey, so I have a couple questions actually. So real quick, you were talking about email before. So just to piggyback on that one talking point, I was kind of asked to do some sort of email nurture, but I was thinking more in the lines of like a weekly newsletter, bringing industry news and insights. That would be kind of, that I would find more interesting. Any thoughts on doing something like that? Primarily because a couple of our recent deals have been resurrected from the past. The company's been around for 7 years, but not really in the main commercial sector I'm going after. But we do have, let's say, 2,000 contacts in our CRM, and I have an SDR cold calling them. That's a slow process, obviously, but he was able to resurrect a couple. So the thoughts are, if I did some sort of weekly newsletter going to them, it might be able to resurrect some deals. Any thoughts or wasted time?
The recommended, I'm not sure this will answer your question directly, but I think it'll help clarify my thoughts for the other people, is create a content strategy that people want, and then have the content flow down through multiple distribution channels. And so content that people want, and then you might need to be slightly repackaged to get sent an email. It might need to get slightly repackaged to get put on YouTube. It might need to get slightly adapted to get on a podcast. It might get slightly have to get changed to put on LinkedIn. Right. But that's the move. So email becomes one distribution channel of a content, deliverable that's going out across multiple areas. And when I was doing it really well for B2B, it almost felt like I was more like a news reporter than a content marketer. And so it was like, this new clinical study came out, like this new hospital just implemented 50 units and had success. Like this happened, like thinking about it more like, PR almost, especially there's one kind of way that it worked for medical professionals for me before, because when you take the mindset of a news reporter, you think about more so, how do I distribute this information so that people understand it and would want it, versus how do I get someone that, clicks on my email and then decides that they want to has enough engagement that we can cold call them or whatever. So there's partially on the mindset. When it comes to the newsletter, like what I would put back to you is, you have 2,000 people. Is the juice worth the squeeze? 2,000 people in an email list. How long is it going to take you to put together that email newsletter? How many pieces of different content are you going to need to fill a newsletter? Are you just going to be curating already things that are already published and sending them out? If so, somebody's going to have to do that. Maybe you're doing that already. I mean, the last thing I would challenge you on, if you're going to do it, is do something like it in a different channel and then compare the results.
Okay. Now, second question, which, it's a little bit outside of your normal wheelhouse, but I know you have some experience with professional services. I'm looking right now at, expense budgets, and I just got the email from the CEO today on current expenses to revenue. And what I'm trying to figure out, if you have some experience with total CAC in a professional services type of situation, which, as you know, it's a lower margin game than B2B SaaS. It's 25% margin, let's say, on professional services. So what would you think you need to see in terms of a multiplier on total CAC for scalability? I could give you more specifics what we're doing if you need them, but could keep it general, high level. But we're basically around, on an initial sale, let's say 65,000 average, where we get 20% margin on product that we're selling. which, call it $10,000 or so, and then $12,000, and then an annual contract value of, let's say, $50,000 on average at a 25% professional services margin.
Mhm.
So what would you think would be a break even for scalability?
I'd have to put together a spreadsheet to really tell you. The rule of thumb on professional services, like the thing that my finance firm tells me that we should be doing, is 10%. We spend probably less than 10%, to be direct, but 10% is the go-to number if you're targeting 30% total profit margin.
30% total. So when you say 10%, you're saying 10x your cost?
10% of first year revenue.
10% of first year revenue. Okay.
So you're getting, your customer's worth $100,000 in revenue, then you can spend 10K to acquire it. That's in a professional services firm that's trying to run a 30% margin. Your business is going to be a little bit different, but you could it's going to give you a general idea, and then you can put together a spreadsheet because you got products and other things in there that you might be able to elevate that a little bit. There's some recurring revenue, there's some cross sell, there's other things like that. We don't look at it that way because we look at our business more like a SaaS business that's recurring, that we expect customers to stay for a while. And so we don't, they put together that spreadsheet and I was like, forget that. That's not what we're doing here. And I changed it, but that's what they came with initially.
So what did you change it to? Because similarly for us, we have that recurring annual revenue with very low churn at this point. Only if someone goes out of business do we lose them at this point.
So we don't actually if I calculated it, it would be very small. We have a small marketing department, and that's essentially all that we do. And we acquire X amount of customers every month, and we divide the cost of the marketing department against the number of customers, which is a very small number. There's other things that people that we're doing are posting on LinkedIn. Customers are recommending us to other people. There's so many other things that don't get caught, but I like to keep things simple. It's so we spent X amount on marketing this month. We got this many customers. Total expenses over customers gives you basic CAC. And it's so low that it's not worth going any more detailed than that.
Gotcha. I'm including salaries though for my head count, my team. So that's where I was looking at the total CAC number and wondering, with your experience, if you had a baseline for where you would need to be in order to justify hiring more people, or setting the benchmark for, if I hire this salary, what do they need to, I'm trying to establish what do we need to produce in order for that position to scale?
Yeah, this is too detailed of a question for me to give you the right answer, because there's cross between product and recurring revenue and professional services that just make it complex. If it's pure professional services, just take total marketing expenses, number of customers, and then do that and try and target less than 10%. But when you have a mix, then you have to have a SaaS CAC, and you have to have this, and you have to put it together. To be honest, the easiest way would be to just take the profit from the professional services that you expect, apply that to first year revenue from the recurring revenue model, and then just use that as your CAC thing. So it would take your first year revenue from 50K a year to 70, which would then give you a little bit more room on CAC. And you could think about whatever your allowable target is. Somewhere between 6 and 18 months is typically pretty standard at companies like that.
I appreciate it. Thank you, man.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate you kicking off the Q&A.
Yeah. It's always testing me with them. Sometimes it's these YouTube metrics. Sometimes it's crazy CAC calculations. I appreciate you, Bob.
I'm excited to bring on Pablo. You can ask this is your first question on Demand Gen Live.
First question. I'm like a radio caller with a
What's up?
First time.
Love the mic.
What's up, man?
Looks great.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here, dude. Man, first of all, thanks for the content that you put out. It's phenomenal, right? I've parachuted into marketing in the last 3 years, and I'm just I heard the word ABM for the first time 3 weeks ago. It's nice. I'm diving through all the acronyms that come through your language. Helps me out so much, man.
Cool. Happy to help.
Thanks. And listen, and in pouring through your podcast, I realized that I'm kind of at a crossroads that you were at one point, right? This kind of content, I call it a relationship flywheel, but it's very similar to what you did in the medical devices arena of creating a show that then gets repurposed. I've kind of done that at, on a nonprofit level, then on an e-commerce you know, B2C company level. Then now I'm doing it for this like $150 million real estate investing company, and it's crushing and whatever. Right. But
That's awesome.
thanks, man. But I'm also can't find a new client. Right. So like, I'm trying to sell this into like, this works in the traditional world, but people haven't really caught up to it. And I heard in your story that you at one point were just like, fuck it, I got to go to B2B SaaS because that's kind of where it's at. But I'm just curious as to like how did you figure out, number one, it's time to just change your, is it called the ICP, right? Like time to change your ideal person that you're going after, how you got fluent in that language and how you got known in that vertical after being in another vertical kind of thing.
So let me just clarify one. So you are a consultant looking to have more customers that you help do whatever that service is.
Yeah, the live show strategy to content repurpose to sales to sales conversion.
Yeah.
Right.
So the strategy is that you need to execute all of the behaviors that you tell your customers to do, which will then attract people that buy into that model.
Yeah.
Right.
So in doing that, I can't figure out who my show is going to be for. Right. And like you switch to B2B SaaS. Right. So is it just make another B2B SaaS? You know, I guess I'm trying to figure out if there is space between the league that you're playing in B2B SaaS and the transition from legacy business to that.
Yeah. And so I think that you have a lot more availability in your segments. So like for us, like, yes, we do this show. Yes, we help our customers think about organic. It's not something that we tend to monetize a lot right now on the organic side. Like we run a paid strategy to drive content into people that drives net new business for high growth companies that are investing in accelerated growth. Like, and so B2B SaaS fits very well because they have high margins, recurring revenue model, forward thinking, believe a lot more in marketing than other industries, invest in marketing a lot more than other industries. It was a great fit for us. And so for you though, I think your availability is a lot different. And so I would try a couple. Like we didn't just like all of a sudden be like, you know, software is the place where we're going to go. Like, it's not just like it clicks. Like I started doing marketing. A couple of people were like, hey, like, we want you to do that for us. And so I think half of it is doing the behavior, which then should attract people if you use the right channels, and then start having different people on your show in different industries and just try and like figure it out. Like it's not like a straightforward process to figure out your ICP. We continue to refine it. It gets even, like it says B2B SaaS, but it's way more narrow than just that. And so you'll be able to figure those things out over time, but we've been doing this for 2 years and like, we're still refining. And so it's like, try and just take a step in the right direction. It might not be real estate. It might not be medical device. There might be a different one. There's another thing to consider, which is that sort of like monetizing like the organic content model is challenging to tie back to direct revenue results. And so that part of the process can be difficult from a retention standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing that. So that part works. It's literally just the conversation from like, dude, this is brilliant, to dude, this is not for me.
Yeah.
That I'm really struggling with. But I appreciate the feedback, man. I'm thinking it's going to be more like future of business development type themed podcast, and talk to people that fancy themselves thought leaders somewhere between VP of Biz Dev to CMO, you know, like in that title kind of thing. And
like biz dev person that sees that their cold calling strategy isn't working, like that could be a good target for you. Cool.
Thanks, man.
Good to see you. Great question.
Yeah, appreciate you, man.
Great question, Pablo. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening. Okay, I have another great question from Colleen. I'm going to bring you on now, Colleen. You can ask your question live.
Cool, thanks. Thank you. So I'm wondering, when you're creating your content strategy, if you're going to just go all in and say, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to build my brand through great content, you know, how important is it for a company to have one voice AKA a Chris Walker, that's out talking to everyone and from Chris, and you're posting on LinkedIn and everywhere else on behalf of the company versus using, multiple voices at the company, posts from the company or, posts from customers. Do you really see, like, is it a huge kind of difference in, choosing that one person who's just going to be the voice for you?
I definitely don't believe that it needs to be one person. I think for a lot of organizations, starting with one person and really proving out the model tends to work better. So like basically all the energy gets invested in one sort of like person. They're the one speaking at the events. They're the one where it's creating the content, where you start to have multiple people doing it, starts to spread out resources and audience, which can be challenging for some companies. But I believe that it doesn't need to be one person. Like if I was doing it again at the medical device company, I was the only one that was going to do it. Our CEO wasn't going to have a LinkedIn Zoom with our customers for an hour every week. So I was the one that went out. And when I did that, like I wasn't out there communicating our company's strategic narrative. I was just interviewing physicians. And so I like depending on what the strategy is, if it's strategic narrative, you're going to need someone like ideally your CEO or your subject matter expert. If you're selling to people that are not like, if it's a head of IT, like maybe you need your head of IT, right? That one's obvious. But you can have other pillars of a show. So you can have like that person that's going to the conferences and speaking at them and does a live Q&A and presents expertise and da-da-da-da-da. And then you can have a marketing team that's out there interviewing IT managers and another person on the business development team that has a show where they just ask like 5 minutes with Jimmy or whatever and ask questions about some specific topic. And so you can have multiple content pillars that other people own. It's just thinking about, is the main person needing to drive a narrative or be a subject matter expert? Because then you start to get restricted on who that person can be. If you're just interviewing people, there's a lot of people that can do that well. And I think even there's a company called Profitwell that does it really well. Like, I don't know if you know about them, but like they have like 5 or 6 shows inside of it. They're like truly building like a network of shows for recurring revenue model businesses. And so there's tons of different ways to approach it depending on the level of organizational buy-in to the strategy. Woof. Is that a lake back there? It looks beautiful. Everyone's got great backgrounds tonight. Good to see you.
Thanks for coming on, Colleen. Interesting question that was submitted in advance that sort of is related to this topic you were just talking about. Our subject matter experts are rather swamped in other projects or demos, and they're not ideal or they're not comfortable doing podcasts or webinars. What's an alternative solution or workaround? I think you just kind of spoke to having like the host or the interviewer, but
here's the solution. Here's the solution. You either purchase or hire somebody that's already a subject matter expert that's creating content for your customers already. And then you see how committed the organization is to the strategy. And so we see companies out there right now, large companies like HubSpot and Outreach, buying media companies because they're smart and they recognize that those companies have attention that matters. And so if a company is smart and they recognize that and they have 3 subject matter experts that are too busy because they're doing demos, that they can't produce content that's going to drive hundreds of demos long term, then if they were thoughtful about it, they would invest the money to go find somebody else that's 100% dedicated to that, to do this, because long term it's way more effective than having people do one-to-one demos with prospects. So it's an interesting question. I challenged our company to do that in 2016 and they said no. So it will tell you how committed the company is to this type of model long term. And if they say no, you could perhaps direct them to the beginning segment where we talked about how much the buyer journey changed since 2008.
Found another good question that someone submitted in advance. They're not here, so I'll ask on their behalf. I work for a very niched company with a really small total addressable market. I'm realizing the marketing strategies need to be like tailored accordingly. What is your view on the best B2B strategy for a small total addressable market? Email marketing, social media, what would you recommend?
Have the show that everyone in your little niche loves. That's it. And it does, again, separate content and distribution and just think about it at a high level. Like, that is the answer. Is it incredibly hard? Yes, it is. But if you're only selling to the top, Coke and Pepsi and whatever the other brands underneath that are like the top, you have 20 companies out there that sell soda that you can sell to. You got to figure out how to get the attention of those 20 soda brands. And you have to figure out how do you, like, what you can do to get the attention of the person inside of that company, whether it's the CMO or the finance manager or anyone in between, for whoever that person is, how you can be so valuable that they want to come and listen to your show or come to your Zoom or whatever, things like that, which creates affinity long term. A second strategy is if you only had 30 and it was very clear what your value proposition was, then, and you had somebody that was a true expert. I see companies miss that because they're using like an analyst that doesn't really understand the core competency of the company. But you could have a true, like, tear down style approach on every single company about what's going on in their business and how you could help, and try and think about, like, it becomes a very much a content play. And so that's something to think about as well. We test that and do that all the time for companies like HubSpot. Is HubSpot going to hire us tomorrow? No. And so another thing to think about is, like, what is a realistic goal? If you only have 50 accounts to sell to, what's a realistic goal of the impact of a marketing channel within a certain period of time? It's an interesting one long term. Like, what I would push someone in that situation to think about is, like, marketing is creating that stuff, that show, that community, whatever. And then sales is obviously going to be doing sales. And what marketers with that size total addressable market get stuck on is that they just help sales do sales and not focus on the brand side. And so just being very clear on what you're trying to accomplish between those two functions, I think, would be interesting from a long-term perspective. Because frankly, I don't see marketers adding a ton of value in just, like, helping sales, like, put together a webinar or, like, do things like that. I think there's a lot of other opportunities for marketers if they can sort of, like, move out of that space.
Good answer. I like it. Bob has a LinkedIn paid ad question. I can't say no to you, Bob. Come back on.
So many questions, so little time.
Let's do it.
So yeah, so
we're getting
LinkedIn,
we're getting great insights on LinkedIn recently, by the way.
that's awesome. I have no insights. I spent $1,000. It had, like, let's say, like 2,000 views, whatever. Let's say 10% of them watched, 25% of it. 50 something people clicked on it, but 0 leads.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts or insights on that one? Because my insight was pause. I paused the ad.
I mean, like, not everything that we run is a home run either. Like, it's not uncommon to run a campaign and spend $1,000 and get no leads. Like, failing is part of the process here. The key is to fail less over time and to learn when you fail, and to make sure that while you're, quote unquote, failing, you're still getting the results that you need, right? And so when, like, I don't swing and miss with my customers very often because we have 35 pieces of creative running at the same time, right? And so when one fails, it's a micro failure. We spent $50. It's very clear that it's not going to work, and we move on. And so that's something to think about as well, like trying to figure out how you can have more volume in order to sort of, like, to hedge against like a failure like that. The second thing that I would argue is if you actually built your like funnel, for a lot of companies, they don't realize if they had 10% conversion rates from raw lead to win, how much more they could pay for a lead. Because they think that they need to get the lead for $50, but they're also building their demand model on winning 0.1% of those. Versus if you won 10%, you could actually theoretically pay $5,000 for the exact same lead. And so it's something that that was more for other people than you, but like my general sense about cost per lead is dramatically different when you build a model with significantly higher conversion rates. And a lot of people don't think that way because they've, for the past 10 years, been trained that we want to collect shitty leads for $40.
Did that answer your question, Bob?
I'm not sure if it did, but
people felt like you just dangled a little LinkedIn carrot right there, making the comment that we've had some good insights on LinkedIn. Care to expand further on that comment?
Sure, let's do it. So on LinkedIn, I've been with a couple of our the accounts that I work on have been running some serious experiments, partially for scalability. And a couple of accounts, like we're already spending $100,000 a month on Facebook. Facebook is delivering more than what we would have expected, which is great. And now we need to actually move to LinkedIn and move from LinkedIn spending $30K a month to try and get that to 100 if it's possible. And so we're taking steps to figure that out. One, what are our cost baselines? Two, how much more scalability is in the channel in terms of reach? How much more creative do we need to put in there? Overall, how much do we think we could spend? Overall, how much more efficiency could we get on our cost targets? And so those are some of the things that I'm going through in my head. And so one of the things that we've been focusing on is efficiency, driving down the cost per quote unquote influence demo that we get through LinkedIn that moves through a demo form after they engaged or interacted or saw or otherwise engaged with the ad that we delivered. And one of the ways that we were able to start bringing it down is by changing the bidding strategy away from something like conversions or landing page views and moving to a brand awareness campaign with impression-based bidding. I've mentioned that a couple of times. You should test it for yourself because we've gone through it with a lot of companies and it doesn't behave this way 100% of the time. And we're not sure what the nuances are yet. But on the companies that I'm running on, which are mid-market velocity sales that have a couple enterprise deals with large total addressable markets inside of LinkedIn, I was able to get CPMs down by 50% through this strategy. For some audiences, I'm paying $20 CPM on LinkedIn for executive level titles, right? And there's if you have a different bidding strategy, you can possibly pay, instead of 20, pay somewhere between 60 and 80, depending on if you're using conversion based and you use other filters like industry and the audiences get smaller, your prices can be significantly higher. And so what happens when those prices go down? One, if the ads are as effective and it matches the strategy that we're doing, you can bring your cost per demo down significantly. For some of the accounts that we're working on, we're driving demos at $250 or less with like some scalability there, which, like I just mentioned to Bob on the conversion rates, when I say $250 and you think that's expensive, think about winning those at 7 to 10%. Customer acquisition cost is not so bad. And so that is one part of it. And then the other part is trying to think about how to increase the reach, which is something that I've been working through a little bit and testing all of the normal things that LinkedIn would tell you to do, like use the expansion network, turn on audience expansion, like expand job titles, add new placements, like all those different things. So far, complete failures. Like we needed to check those boxes as we move through these with each individual customer. It's important to test those things, but those experiments did not work. The second thing is when you have CPMs that are $20 on LinkedIn and you're hitting executives with good targeting, the difference between Facebook and LinkedIn is almost the same. Like we pay at times $12 to $22 CPM, depending on the audience size and whether it's coming out of a custom audience with a SaaS product or different things like that. Like they're almost the same. And so if there's more scalability in LinkedIn, then you can actually start to adjust the Facebook strategy as well. And so those are some of the things that I'm seeing. In general, it really depends on your audience, how effective LinkedIn is going to be. At least that's what I've seen so far. Audiences that we are definitely seeing work: sales, marketing, recruiting, other executive audiences and customer success, customer service, like those types of functions we're seeing it work. Another component of this is that LinkedIn's attribution right now is a lot cleaner than Facebook's attribution model. And so we're getting better. Two things are happening. Prices of LinkedIn are going down. LinkedIn's becoming more attractive from that standpoint. Facebook's attribution is being hurt. So we're have less insights as to exactly what's happening in that channel. We're moving, more of the attention onto LinkedIn. There are some things that are making it a lot more attractive long-term than the things that I was talking about 6 months ago, which is exciting. The number one challenge that we're facing on LinkedIn is that there's not enough people to give the ads to if you don't have small total addressable markets. If you're going for like total scalability, you're going to need other channels than LinkedIn, because the difference between the total audience size that the LinkedIn ads gives you, which for some of the example that I'm going to give you, the audience size that they give me is 980,000 people match these criteria that we're going to give our ads to for large TAM SaaS. And then when you deliver the ads, 45,000 people see the ads, which is 5% of the audience size, because a majority of the people that match those criteria never log into LinkedIn and they never have an opportunity to see the ad. And so that's a gap that I'm trying to figure out how to close. And the real answer might be that those people aren't enough people right now in that certain segment don't use LinkedIn enough in order for it to have full scale. And we actually need the other channels a lot more than we thought. And so those are a couple of insights if you're looking to spend significant amount of money on LinkedIn that's not pure like conversion-based lead gen. Come sign up for my webinar, like come download our ebook. If you're not trying to do that stuff, like those are a couple of tips that are hot off the press.
Zooming out, Dave Costello threw a good question in Slack that I think is a nice segue to expand on this topic a little bit more. So zooming out though a little bit, do you see LinkedIn as a real lead driver for a B2B company with a big purchase price, or just more of a brand channel to just get eyes on content?
I think we need to define big. What's a big purchase price? Just drop it in the chat.
I mean,
drum roll, $1 million.
$1 million. Did that, Jess?
So the short answer on this one is I don't have the answer for you. Like in those types of large deals, like I recommend like thinking about whether or not it even matters, like whether they came inbound or outbound. Like a lot of the companies that sell those deals just think about it as like, we're a team and we're trying to win those deals. And it would be hard because of how long and complex the sales cycles are to even measure that effectively. Would I run LinkedIn ads to those people? And would I spend a ton of time optimizing creative? We're going to work with a company shortly that is in this sort of situation. They sell $500,000 deals. They have 2,000 accounts that they can sell to. And the game on LinkedIn at that point is, how do you create the operational layer of how do you create enough content to fill the channel so that you don't hit fatigue? It becomes it's way less on the budget because there's not a lot of people. It's way more on how do I produce a new image every day that I can deliver to these 2,000 accounts? How do I put a new message out every day? And so I'm actually really interested in that one. We work with companies that typically have large total addressable markets where creative can run for a long time without fatigue because there's so many people. And really interested in how the dynamics change when you start moving to a smaller model where like it's really about how good your messaging is to those types of companies and how frequently you can do it operationally. And so would you expect, are you going to run, 5K a month in LinkedIn ads and expect every single one of your customers to come to your website and ask for a demo? Probably not. Is it smart for $1 million deal to spend $5,000 a month on LinkedIn ads with good content hitting those people? Absolutely. And so when I look at any model, like I mentioned at the beginning, like we center on how many people are coming in to buy. You might need to adjust that slightly, but again, it's the trend against that. And so like if it was one person last month and three people this month and 6 people the next month, like there's a clear trend that something is happening there. And then I mentioned, somebody asked me a question. It's a question that I get a lot. It's hard to explain. And the question was like something about like, when you have like these 100 people coming in through a demo form and then converting to SQOs at 40%, like how do you know where it's coming from? Because you center on things and you do a lot of things that don't have attribution. And the real answer is like, if you're doing the stuff, like I can't tell you, I can't prove it to you on some sheet, but when you're doing it, I know that the podcast is driving those things. I know when I have a LinkedIn video that gets 800 views and 3 people come inbound that day, I know what's going on. And so it's really hard to explain. I'm sure that there's some demand marketers on the Zoom and some people listening that have had control of the system and you can almost like feel it. I know it's not a good answer for people, but it truly is the way that it works in this type of model.
Just dropped some serious LinkedIn knowledge in the last 10 minutes. It was a good one.
Great.
For
Love
that.
sharing that stuff.
We're kind of tapped out of questions.
Sounds great.
Closing thoughts?
Everyone can get to bed a little bit early.
Yeah. How are you going to close this out tonight, Chris?
No, nothing earth shattering here. It's great to have you all. Love the questions. Love seeing some new faces. And can't wait to see you again soon. We're trying to put together another event with Dave. Thank you for anyone that attended and enjoyed it. That episode is live on the podcast. Some great Q&A from marketing leaders at like Series A, B companies. So there's some great questions and insights there from Dave and I. And we're going to keep rolling with the event series. So whether it's Dave or like some people came to the Udi one, we're going to try and have like new, really smart, awesome people for live events. And so stay tuned for the details on that. And then when we can, when it's safe to do so, we will be doing some real physical events. People have heard me talking about the past couple of weeks about how when trade shows are back, they should not do the trade shows and they should do this thing that I'm talking about instead. And we're going to do some of those. And so if we do it in your city, we'd love to see you there and be able to meet you in real life. More announcements coming. We expect that won't probably happen until at least Q3, possibly Q4 or later, depending on the situation. But can't wait to get back out there and do some stuff in real life. Definitely.
Awesome to see you guys. Email us if you have
Come
any
to Australia. Yeah, let's do that.
For that. Have an event on the beach.
Bye, everyone. Have a great week.
See you next Tuesday.